The radio crackled with static, then silence. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Reaper Rodriguez pressed his earpiece deeper, hoping the transmission would clear. Nothing. Just the hollow hiss of dead air where air support should have been confirming their extraction coordinates. Around him, his SEAL team crouched in the rocky outcropping, their night vision goggles scanning the valley below where muzzle flashes had been painting deadly constellations just minutes before. Overwatch, this is Ground Team Alpha requesting immediate air support for extraction, Rodriguez whispered into his throat mic. The response was a funeral dirge of electronic snow. He tried again, switching frequencies. Dead. All channels had gone ghost. The mission had started clean. Intelligence indicated a high-value target holed up in a compound 30 clicks inside enemy territory. Simple grab and go. But intelligence, as Rodriguez had learned in his 15 years of operations, was often as reliable as a chocolate teapot. What should have been a surgical strike had devolved into a running firefight when they discovered the compound housed not one, but an entire cell of foreign operatives. Now they were pinned down with a wounded teammate, Petty Officer Jake "Iceman" Kowalski, who'd taken shrapnel to his leg during their hasty egress. The metallic taste of adrenaline coated Rodriguez's mouth as he calculated their odds. 6 men, limited ammunition, no air support, and enemy forces closing from 3 directions. The math wasn't encouraging. "Chief, we've got movement on the ridgeline," whispered Petty Officer First Class Devin "Ghost" Williams, his rifle scope trained on distant shadows. "Estimate 20 tangos, maybe more." Rodriguez closed his eyes briefly, running through their options. They could try to move Iceman, but his condition was deteriorating. They could make a stand, but ammunition was finite. They could attempt to reach the secondary extraction point, but that meant crossing 2 kilometers of open ground with hostiles in pursuit. The sky above them remained empty, an indifferent canvas of stars that offered no salvation. Then they heard it, the distinctive whop-whop-whop of rotor blades cutting through mountain air. Rodriguez felt his chest tighten with hope, then confusion. The sound was wrong, too light, too agile for the heavy lift Chinooks they'd been promised. This was something else entirely. "Overwatch, we have unknown aircraft approaching our position," Rodriguez transmitted, knowing the futility even as he spoke. "Requesting identification." The aircraft emerged from behind the mountain ridge like a mechanical predator, its silhouette unfamiliar against the star-scattered darkness. It moved with purpose, flying low and fast, avoiding radar signatures and following terrain contours with surgical precision. No navigation lights, no radio chatter, just the growing thunder of rotors that promised either salvation or annihilation. Rodriguez gripped his weapon tighter, unsure whether to prepare for rescue or last stand. The Black Hawk descended toward their position like a falling shadow, its pilot flying without clearance, without authorization, and apparently without fear. Through his night vision, Rodriguez could see the aircraft's dark hull, unmarked and menacing. The rotor wash began stirring dust devils around their position, and still no radio contact. "Who the hell is that?" Ghost whispered, his voice barely audible over the approaching rotors. Rodriguez had no answer, but he knew one thing with crystal clarity. Whoever was piloting that bird was either their salvation or about to become their biggest problem. In 15 years of operations, he'd never seen anything like it. Black Hawks didn't just materialize out of thin air without command authorization. They didn't fly solo into hot zones without backup, and they sure as hell didn't approach at combat speed with radio silence. The aircraft's nose dipped slightly as it began its descent, and Rodriguez caught a glimpse of the pilot's helmet in the cockpit. Something about the figure's posture, the way they moved the controls with fluid precision, suggested this wasn't some rogue operation or mistake. This was intentional, calculated, professional. "Chief, what's the call?" Williams asked, his rifle now trained on the approaching aircraft. The other team members had taken similar defensive positions, torn between hope and suspicion. Rodriguez watched the Black Hawk's approach pattern, aggressive but controlled, tactical but not hostile. The pilot was showing skills he'd only seen from the most elite aviators, threading the needle between mountain peaks with the kind of precision that came from years of combat experience. This wasn't some cowboy pilot looking for glory. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The aircraft settled into a hover 30 meters from their position, its rotors creating a maelstrom of dust and debris. Still no radio contact. Still no identification. But through the swirling sand, Rodriguez could see the side door sliding open, revealing a figure in full combat gear gesturing for them to move. Time slowed to a crawl. Rodriguez had to make the call, trust the unknown pilot or stay put, and hope for official extraction that might never come. Iceman was getting paler by the minute, his blood loss accelerating despite their field dressings. Enemy forces were closing from multiple directions, and somewhere in the darkness, their original extraction team had vanished into electronic void. The figure in the helicopter's doorway raised one hand, 5 fingers, then a closed fist, then 5 again. Universal military signal for 5 minutes, move now, 5 personnel maximum. Iceman can't walk, Ghost shouted over the rotor noise. We need to carry him. Rodriguez nodded, his decision crystallizing. Unknown pilot or not, this was their best shot at getting everyone home alive. He signaled his team to move, grabbing Iceman under one arm while Williams took the other. They began their sprint toward the waiting aircraft, every step a gamble with fate. As they approached the helicopter, Rodriguez tried to get a better look at their mysterious rescuer. The pilot remained focused on the controls, hands steady despite the challenging hover in turbulent mountain air. Professional, unflappable, the kind of steady presence that suggested extensive combat experience. They reached the aircraft and began loading Iceman first, his unconscious form lifted carefully into the cabin by the waiting crew member. Rodriguez followed, then Williams, then the rest of the team in practiced efficiency. As the last man cleared the threshold, the helicopter began its ascent before the door had even fully closed. Only then did Rodriguez get his first clear look at their pilot. Through the cockpit door, he could see the figure's profile, smaller than he'd expected, with movements that suggested not just skill but artistry in flight. The pilot's helmet bore no identifying marks, no unit patches, no name tape. Ghost in every sense of the word. "Who are you?" Rodriguez called forward, knowing the pilot probably couldn't hear him over engine noise but needing to ask anyway. The pilot's head turned slightly, just enough for Rodriguez to catch a glimpse of eyes behind the visor, calm, focused, carrying the weight of too many missions and too many close calls. Then the pilot returned attention to flying, banking sharply to avoid a mountainside and climbing towards safer altitude. Rodriguez settled back against the cabin wall, finally allowing himself to breathe. They were alive. They were airborne, and they owed it all to a pilot who'd appeared out of nowhere like something from a ghost story. But as his adrenaline began to ebb, questions multiplied. Who was flying this bird? Why no radio contact? And most importantly, what kind of pilot had the skills and the authority to launch a solo rescue mission into hostile territory without clearance? The Black Hawk continued its climb into the star-filled darkness, carrying its cargo of questions and its mysterious pilot toward an uncertain destination. 20 minutes into the flight, the helicopter banked sharply eastward, away from their expected route to the forward operating base. Rodriguez felt his muscles tense again. Either their pilot knew something about threats along the primary route, or they were being taken somewhere unplanned. He caught Ghost's eye and saw his own concern reflected there. The aircraft's flight pattern suggested someone with intimate knowledge of local air defense systems and patrol routes. They flew low through valleys, hugging terrain features that would mask their heat signature from surface-to-air missiles. The pilot's technique was flawless, maintaining just enough altitude to clear obstacles while staying below radar coverage. This wasn't lucky flying. This was the product of extensive mission planning and battlefield intelligence. Rodriguez tried again to establish communication with the cockpit, keying his radio to internal frequencies. Static. Either their comms were still jammed, or their pilot wasn't interested in conversation. The crew member who'd helped load Iceman sat silently across from them, face hidden behind tactical goggles and a balaclava. No unit patches, no identifying markers of any kind. Through the cabin windows, Rodriguez could see they were following a route he didn't recognize. Mountain peaks scrolled past like sleeping giants, their snow-covered summits catching starlight. This wasn't the direct path home. This was something else entirely, a route that suggested their pilot had alternate plans for their extraction. Iceman stirred slightly, consciousness flickering behind his eyelids. The crew member immediately moved to check his vitals, hands moving with medical precision over his wounds. Not just a door gunner then, but someone with field medic training. The mystery deepened. "Where are we going?" Rodriguez called out, but received no response. The engine noise made communication difficult, but he suspected their mysterious rescuers weren't interested in explanations anyway. They were passengers now, dependent entirely on the judgment and intentions of a pilot they knew nothing about. The helicopter began another course change, this time heading south toward what Rodriguez hoped was friendly territory. But hope and certainty were different creatures, and right now he was long on the former and short on the latter. All he could do was trust that whoever was flying this bird had better intelligence about safe passage than his original mission planners had possessed about the target compound. Outside, the darkness held its secrets close, offering no clues about their destination or their mysterious pilot's identity. The helicopter's course straightened as they crossed what Rodriguez recognized as a major river valley, a landmark that suggested they were indeed heading toward friendly territory. Relief began to compete with curiosity in his chest. Whatever their pilot's identity, the flight path indicated knowledge of safe corridors and extraction protocols that went beyond mere flight training. As if responding to his thoughts, the cockpit door opened slightly, and the pilot's voice came through the intercom for the first time. The words were crisp, professional, tinged with an accent Rodriguez couldn't quite place. "Ground Team Alpha, this is your pilot. ETA to medical facilities 15 minutes. Prepare your wounded for immediate transfer upon landing." The voice was higher than Rodriguez had expected, clearly female, which explained the smaller stature he'd noticed earlier. But there was something else in the tone that suggested extensive combat experience. No uncertainty, no hesitation, just the calm authority of someone accustomed to life-and-death decisions. "Roger that," Rodriguez replied. "Can you identify yourself and your unit?" A pause, then, negative on identification, focus on your wounded. Professional deflection, but Rodriguez caught something else in the pilot's voice. A weariness that suggested too many missions like this one, too many close calls, too many questions without satisfactory answers. Whoever she was, she'd been doing this for a long time. The crew member began preparing medical equipment for transfer, movements efficient and practiced. Everything about this operation suggested a level of preparation and professionalism that went far beyond coincidental rescue. Someone had been watching their mission. Someone had been ready to intervene when official channels failed. The question remained, who and why? Through the forward windscreen, Rodriguez could see lights in the distance, the familiar glow of a forward operating base, complete with landing pad illumination and medical facilities. Home, or as close to home as they were likely to get tonight. But as they approached the landing zone, Rodriguez realized their questions were just beginning. The Black Hawk's landing was textbook perfect, a smooth touchdown that barely jarred Iceman despite his injuries. The moment skids touched tarmac, medical personnel swarmed the aircraft with practiced efficiency. Rodriguez watched his wounded teammate disappear into their capable hands, finally allowing himself to believe they'd all make it home. As the medical team worked, Rodriguez turned to thank their mysterious pilot but found the cockpit empty. Through the windscreen, he could see a figure in flight gear walking rapidly toward a smaller aircraft parked at the far end of the flight line, a little bird helicopter that hadn't been there when they'd landed. Ghost reflexes, ghost departure. "Sir, you need to debrief immediately," a voice said behind him. Rodriguez turned to find a Marine Corps colonel with intelligence insignia, flanked by two MPs, not the welcome committee he'd expected. "Colonel, we need to thank our pilot first," Rodriguez said, gesturing toward the departing figure. "Without her intervention—" "Your pilot," the colonel's eyebrows rose. "Chief Rodriguez, according to our flight logs, no aircraft were dispatched for your extraction. Your rescue helicopter doesn't exist." Rodriguez stared at the man, then back toward the flight line where the little bird was already spooling up its rotors. The figure in the pilot's seat was little more than a silhouette now, but even at this distance, he could sense their focus on departure rather than recognition. "That bird saved our lives," Rodriguez said. "Someone needs to know about it." The colonel's expression grew more serious. "Chief, you're going to tell us everything about this unauthorized extraction, every detail. Because according to our radar tracking, your rescue aircraft appeared on scope exactly 18 minutes ago and vanished from controlled airspace 3 minutes after landing. No flight plan, no radio contact, no identification codes." As if summoned by their conversation, the little bird lifted off and disappeared into the darkness, its navigation lights winking out moments after takeoff. Rodriguez watched it go with growing frustration and admiration. Whoever their pilot was, she just pulled off a rescue mission that would be studied in military aviation schools, if anyone was willing to admit it had happened. The colonel gestured toward a debriefing facility. "This way, Chief, we have a lot to discuss." But as Rodriguez walked toward the building, one question burned brighter than all the others. Who was the pilot willing to risk everything to save a team the system had apparently abandoned? And why did he suspect this wasn't the first time she'd flown into the darkness to bring people home? 3 hours later, Rodriguez emerged from debriefing more confused than when he'd entered. The intelligence officers had taken detailed notes about the rescue, but their questions suggested they were fishing for information rather than clarifying known facts. References were made to previous incidents and unauthorized flight operations, but no specifics were offered. The official conclusion was that Rodriguez and his team had been extracted by persons unknown, using aircraft of undetermined origin for purposes requiring further investigation. Translation: someone had saved their lives, and the system had no idea who or why. Walking across the base toward temporary quarters, Rodriguez found himself scanning the flight line for any sign of the mysterious Black Hawk or its pilot. Nothing. Even the landing pad showed no trace of their earlier presence, no fuel stains, no tire marks, nothing to suggest a helicopter had ever touched down. At the medical facility, he checked on Iceman, who was stable and conscious. "Chief," his teammate said weakly, "did you get a chance to thank our angel?" "Angel?" "That pilot saved our asses when everyone else had written us off." Iceman's voice carried the reverence of someone who'd looked death in the face and found salvation in an unexpected form. "Never got to see who it was, but whoever flew that bird, they're the real deal." Rodriguez nodded, understanding exactly what his teammate meant. In 15 years of military service, he'd flown with some of the best pilots in the world. But tonight, he'd witnessed something different, not just exceptional flying skills, but the kind of moral courage required to launch unauthorized into hostile territory to save strangers. As he finally settled into his temporary bunk, Rodriguez made himself a promise. He would find out who their mysterious pilot was. He owed her that much, and more importantly, other teams in similar situations might need the same kind of intervention that had saved their lives. The next morning brought new questions rather than answers. Rodriguez's team was scheduled for transport back to their home base, but their departure was delayed pending additional intelligence review. Translation: someone higher up the chain of command was very interested in their mysterious rescue. During breakfast, Rodriguez overheard fragments of conversation from other personnel, whispered references to ghost flights and unauthorized air operations that suggested their experience wasn't isolated. Other teams had reported similar mysterious interventions, always involving unidentified aircraft appearing at critical moments and vanishing without trace. The pattern was intriguing and troubling in equal measure. Either someone was running a highly classified rescue operation outside normal channels, or a rogue pilot with extraordinary skills was taking it upon themselves to fill gaps in official coverage. Both possibilities raised serious questions about operational security and chain of command. Rodriguez was contemplating these implications when a Marine sergeant approached his table. "Chief Rodriguez, Colonel Martinez wants to see you, immediately." The colonel's office was Spartan and professional, dominated by operational charts and secure communication equipment. Martinez himself was a combat veteran with intelligence background, not someone inclined toward either paranoia or wild speculation. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of confirmed information rather than conjecture. "Chief, your extraction last night was the seventh unauthorized rescue operation recorded in this sector over the past 6 months," Martinez said without preamble. Each incident involved aircraft that appeared without warning, conducted successful extractions under combat conditions, and departed without radio contact or identification. Rodriguez felt a chill of anticipation. "Are we talking about the same pilot?" "We believe so. Single pilot, extraordinary flying skills, operates primarily at night in response to compromised or failed official operations. The aircraft used sometimes Black Hawks, sometimes Little Birds, once even an Apache configured for transport." The colonel activated a wall display showing a regional map marked with incident locations. 7 red dots scattered across hundreds of miles of hostile territory, each representing a team pulled from desperate circumstances by their unknown guardian. "The question," Martinez continued, "is whether we're dealing with an unauthorized operator or something more complex." Rodriguez studied the map, noting the tactical sophistication required to monitor multiple areas of operation simultaneously. This level of intelligence gathering and rapid response suggests significant resources and planning. "Exactly, which brings us to why you're here." Martinez pulled a classified folder from his desk. "We want you to help identify this pilot. Your team had the longest direct contact, and frankly, we need to know if we're dealing with friend or foe." The implications hit Rodriguez like physical force. Someone had been watching multiple operations, maintaining ready aircraft, and possessing intelligence capabilities that rivaled official channels. The skill level required suggested military training at the highest levels, but operating outside command structure raised questions about loyalty, authorization, and ultimate objectives. "What aren't you telling me, Colonel?" Rodriguez asked. Martinez hesitated, then made a decision. 3 months ago, a decorated Air Force pilot was declared killed in action during a classified operation. Her body was never recovered. The aircraft she was piloting disappeared from radar and was assumed destroyed by enemy fire. Rodriguez felt puzzle pieces beginning to align in his mind. "And you think?" "I think someone with her skills and her moral compass might have survived, might have access to resources we don't understand, and might have decided that official channels aren't always adequate for protecting our people in the field." The colonel slid a photograph across the desk. Rodriguez found himself looking at a young woman in Air Force dress uniform, her expression serious but not without warmth. The eyes were familiar, the same calm intensity he'd glimpsed in the helicopter cockpit just hours earlier. Captain Elena Phoenix Vasquez, Martinez said, one of the most gifted pilots in Air Force history, shot down during a classified mission while providing close air support to a SEAL team under circumstances remarkably similar to yours. Rodriguez studied the photograph, trying to reconcile the formal portrait with his memory of the mysterious pilot. The pieces fit, but raised even more troubling questions. If Captain Vasquez had survived her shoot-down, why hadn't she made contact with friendly forces? What resources was she using to conduct solo rescue operations? And most critically, what had happened during her missing months that had transformed her from regular military pilot to ghost operator? Colonel, if she's alive and conducting these operations, why not bring her in? Officially recognize what she's doing. Martinez's expression grew complicated. Because the operation where she was shot down, let's just say there were political considerations that made official acknowledgement difficult. Captain Vasquez may have good reasons for maintaining her current status. The implication hung in the air between them like unexploded ordnance. Rodriguez understood that he was being briefed on information that existed in the shadowy space between official policy and operational necessity. Captain Vasquez, if she was indeed their mysterious pilot, had apparently chosen to operate outside the system that had failed to protect her. Now that system wanted to bring her back into the fold, assuming she was willing to return. "What do you need from me?" Rodriguez asked. "Help us find her. Help us understand what resources she's using and why she's chosen this path. And if possible, help us convince her that she doesn't have to do this alone." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the complexity of his new mission. Finding someone who didn't want to be found, someone with the skills and resources to remain invisible, would require more than traditional investigation methods. It would require understanding the mind of a pilot who'd chosen duty over personal safety, repeatedly risking everything to save strangers who'd been abandoned by their own system. As he prepared to leave, Martinez added one final piece of information. "Chief, there's something else. The aircraft Captain Vasquez was flying when she was shot down. It was never found because it never crashed. Long-range satellite imagery suggests it made a controlled landing in disputed territory. If she survived, she may have access to resources we haven't considered." Rodriguez paused at the door, processing this revelation. A controlled landing meant survival was possible. It also meant Captain Vasquez might have access to military hardware, communication equipment, and intelligence resources that could explain her ability to monitor multiple operations simultaneously. But it also raised darker questions about what she might have encountered during her time in disputed territory, and what agreements or compromises might have been necessary for her continued survival and operation. Walking back across the base, Rodriguez found himself looking up at the sky with new understanding. Somewhere in that vast expanse, a pilot who'd been declared dead was continuing her mission by her own rules, answering to her own conscience rather than chain of command. It was both inspiring and terrifying, a reminder that sometimes the system's failures created their own solutions, regardless of whether those solutions fit within established parameters. The hunt for Phoenix had begun, but Rodriguez suspected he was tracking someone who had always been exceptional at avoiding detection. This wouldn't be a traditional investigation. It would be a chess match played against an opponent who understood the game better than anyone realized, someone who'd already demonstrated a willingness to sacrifice everything for the principle that no one gets left behind. As he prepared for the complex mission ahead, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that Captain Elena Phoenix Vasquez wasn't just evading capture. She was testing the system's willingness to acknowledge that sometimes heroism operates outside the boundaries of policy and protocol. The question was whether that system would prove worthy of the pilot who'd refused to abandon it, even after it had apparently abandoned her. 2 weeks later, Rodriguez found himself in a different kind of briefing room, surrounded by analysts, intelligence specialists, and officers from multiple services. The search for Phoenix had escalated into a formal investigation, but one conducted with unusual discretion and sensitivity. Everyone understood they were dealing with someone who deserved respect rather than apprehension. The evidence had mounted steadily. Satellite imagery showed a pattern of aircraft movements that corresponded perfectly with rescue operations. Fuel depot records revealed discrepancies that suggested regular, unauthorized resupply. Most tellingly, communications intercepts had picked up fragmentary radio transmissions using call signs and encryption protocols that matched Captain Vasquez's training and background. "She's not hiding from us," observed Major Sarah Kim, the lead intelligence analyst. "She's just operating on a different level. Every move she makes is calculated to avoid detection while maintaining operational effectiveness. It's actually quite brilliant." Colonel Martinez activated a new display showing Phoenix's apparent area of operations, a vast territory encompassing multiple bases and operational sectors. The question remains, how is she accessing intelligence about operations in need of support? She's responding to emergencies sometimes before official channels have even recognized the problem. Rodriguez had been wondering about this himself. Phoenix's response times were too good to be explained by monitoring open radio frequencies or satellite observation. She was getting intelligence from somewhere inside the system, which suggested either she'd maintained contact with sympathetic personnel or she'd found ways to access classified communications networks. "What if she never left?" Rodriguez said suddenly, the thought crystallizing as he spoke. "What if Captain Vasquez has been in contact with people all along, just not through official channels?" The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. If Phoenix had maintained informal networks within the military intelligence community, it would explain her access to real-time operational information. It would also suggest that her solo operations had tacit support from people who believed the official system was sometimes inadequate for protecting personnel in the field. Major Kim pulled up personnel files on the large screen. Captain Vasquez's training records show extensive relationships with pilots, intelligence officers, and special operations personnel across multiple services. If even a small percentage of those people believed in her mission, she'd have a network capable of providing real-time intelligence and logistical support, Colonel Martinez finished. "The question is whether we consider this a security breach or an innovative solution to operational gaps." Rodriguez found himself admiring Phoenix's approach even as he worked to understand it. She'd apparently created an unofficial support network that allowed her to continue serving while avoiding the political complications that had led to her initial abandonment. It was both insubordination and patriotism, both security violation and moral imperative. "Colonel," Rodriguez said, "what if we're approaching this wrong? What if instead of trying to bring Captain Vasquez back into official channels, we acknowledge that what she's doing fills a genuine operational need? Maybe the solution isn't capture but cooperation." The suggestion sparked intense discussion around the room. Some officers viewed Phoenix's operations as dangerous precedent that undermined command authority. Others recognized that her results spoke for themselves: 7 successful rescue operations without casualties or diplomatic complications. The debate reflected broader tensions within the military about adaptability versus adherence to established protocol. After an hour of discussion, Colonel Martinez called for quiet. "Here's what we're going to do. Chief Rodriguez, you're going to attempt contact with Captain Vasquez, not to apprehend her but to establish communication. We need to understand her requirements, her resources, and her willingness to coordinate with official operations." Rodriguez nodded, understanding the complexity of his assignment. Making contact with someone who'd successfully evaded detection for months would require more than traditional communication methods. It would require understanding how Phoenix thought, what motivated her, and what conditions might make her willing to trust the system that had failed her once before. How do I find someone who doesn't want to be found? Rodriguez asked. Major Kim smiled grimly. You don't find her, Chief. You create circumstances where she finds you. The plan that emerged over the following hours was elegant in its simplicity. Rodriguez would return to field operations with a team specifically configured to serve as bait for Phoenix's intervention. They would undertake missions with deliberately insufficient support, creating the kind of emergency situations that had triggered her previous appearances. It was dangerous, but it was also the most likely method of establishing contact with a pilot who responded to crisis rather than invitation. 3 days later, Rodriguez found himself back in hostile territory with a hand-picked team of volunteers who understood the risks of their unusual mission. They were equipped with standard gear, but deliberately limited air support, creating the conditions that historically prompted Phoenix interventions. The mission was simple: establish an observation post overlooking a known enemy supply route and report on traffic patterns. But the location was exposed, extraction options were limited, and communications with headquarters would be intentionally restricted. Everything about the operation was designed to create the circumstances where official support might prove inadequate. On the second night of observation, they got their opportunity. Enemy patrol activity increased dramatically, suggesting their position had been compromised. Rodriguez called for immediate extraction, but headquarters reported that air support was delayed due to mechanical issues with primary aircraft and weather concerns affecting backup options. It was the perfect scenario for Phoenix intervention. A team in immediate danger with official support unavailable due to circumstances beyond anyone's control. Rodriguez positioned his team for defense while monitoring radio frequencies for any sign of unauthorized aircraft activity. 20 minutes after his extraction request was denied, they heard the familiar sound of rotor blades approaching through darkness. The helicopter appeared exactly as it had weeks before: no navigation lights, no radio contact, approaching at high speed from an unexpected direction. But this time, Rodriguez was prepared. As the aircraft settled into its landing approach, he activated a portable radio beacon on a specific frequency that intelligence analysts had determined Phoenix might monitor. "Phoenix, this is Ground Team Alpha," he transmitted. "We need to talk." For a moment, the only response was rotor noise and static. Then, through his headset came a voice he recognized. "Ground Team Alpha, this is Overwatch. Are you in immediate danger?" "Negative immediate danger," Rodriguez replied carefully. "But we need extraction, and we need to establish communication protocols for future operations." Another pause. The helicopter maintained its hover pilot, apparently weighing options. Finally, board for extraction, communication discussion en route. As Rodriguez and his team loaded into the familiar aircraft, he felt both relief and anticipation. They'd successfully made contact with Phoenix, but the real challenge was just beginning. Now they had to convince a pilot who'd been abandoned by the system to trust that system enough to work within it, or at least alongside it. As the helicopter climbed into darkness, Rodriguez prepared for what might be the most important conversation of his military career. The flight proceeded in tense silence for the first 10 minutes, the only sound the steady rhythm of rotors and engines. Rodriguez could see the pilot's silhouette in the cockpit, posture rigid with concentration and probably suspicion. Finally, Phoenix's voice came through the intercom. "Ground Team Alpha, explain your beacon transmission and your knowledge of my operations." Rodriguez chose his words carefully. "Phoenix, we know who you are, we know what you've been doing, and we know you've saved the lives of at least 43 military personnel over the past 6 months." A pause. "Knowledge is an explanation, Chief. How did you find me?" "We didn't find you. We created circumstances where you would find us. Because that's what you do, you respond when the system fails people who deserve better." Through the cockpit door, Rodriguez could see Phoenix's head turn slightly, considering his words. The system failed me too, Chief. Why should I trust it now? The question carried weight that went far beyond operational considerations. Rodriguez understood that Phoenix's decision to operate outside official channels wasn't just tactical. It was deeply personal, rooted in whatever had happened during the mission where she'd been declared killed in action. Because the system is trying to do better, Rodriguez replied. Because there are people inside it who recognize that what you're doing shouldn't be necessary, but since it is necessary, maybe we can find ways to support it officially. Support it how? Intelligence sharing, logistics coordination, recognition that sometimes the rules need to be flexible enough to allow for initiatives like yours. Phoenix was quiet for several minutes, apparently considering the implications. When she spoke again, her voice carried a different tone, less suspicious, more thoughtful. What exactly are you proposing, Chief? A meeting, face to face, with people who have the authority to make policy decisions. Not to shut down your operations, but to understand how they can be integrated with official capabilities. Integration implies oversight. Oversight implies control. Control implies the possibility of another betrayal. The word betrayal hung in the cabin air like smoke, revealing the depth of Phoenix's sense of abandonment. Rodriguez realized he was dealing with someone whose faith in institutions had been shattered by personal experience, someone who'd chosen individual action over collective trust, because that trust had proven fatal to people she tried to protect. Phoenix, what happened during your last official mission? Another long pause. Then, with emotion carefully controlled, I was providing close air support to a team very much like yours, when political considerations made continued support inconvenient. I was ordered to withdraw. I refused. When I continued providing support, my own forces designated me as non-cooperative and terminated my mission. The team I was protecting was overrun because they lost air cover the moment I was forced to withdraw. The revelation hit Rodriguez like physical force. Phoenix hadn't been shot down by enemy action. She'd been abandoned by her own command structure for refusing to abandon people who needed her protection. Her survival and subsequent operations weren't just about filling gaps in official coverage. They were about ensuring that what happened to her team would never happen again. How many? Rodriguez asked quietly. 12, all killed because political considerations outweighed their lives. Phoenix's voice was steady, but Rodriguez could hear the weight of survivor guilt and institutional rage that motivated her solo mission. Understanding flooded through Rodriguez, accompanied by deep respect for Phoenix's moral courage. She wasn't operating outside the system because she was rogue. She was operating outside it because she'd seen what happened when the system prioritized politics over personnel. Her unauthorized missions were an ongoing act of conscience, a refusal to accept that sometimes people had to be sacrificed for larger considerations. Phoenix, the people I work with now, they understand that what happened to you was wrong. They want to find ways to prevent it from happening again. Words are easy, Chief. Guarantees are harder. Then let's talk about guarantees. Face to face, with people who can make binding commitments about operational support and political protection. The helicopter began to descend, apparently approaching a landing zone Rodriguez didn't recognize. Through the windows, he could see lights arranged in a tactical pattern, definitely a prepared position, probably one of Phoenix's established operational bases. Phoenix, wherever we're landing, is this where you've been operating from? One of several locations. I've learned not to depend on single points of failure. The aircraft touched down with characteristic smoothness, but Rodriguez noticed they were at what appeared to be an abandoned airstrip rather than an active base. Portable lighting equipment illuminated the area, and he could see several other aircraft in the shadows. A mix of helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft that suggested Phoenix had access to significantly more resources than anyone had suspected. As the rotors wound down, Phoenix finally emerged from the cockpit. Even in dim lighting, Rodriguez could see that months of solo operations had changed her. She was thinner than in her official photographs, with the kind of alertness that came from constant vigilance. But her movements were confident, purposeful, suggesting someone who'd found her element despite operating outside all normal support structures. "Welcome to the Forgotten," Phoenix said, gesturing toward her improvised base. "This is what happens when people decide that conscience matters more than career." Rodriguez looked around the facility with growing amazement. The organization and equipment suggested Phoenix had built not just a solo operation, but the foundation of an entire alternative support network. This wasn't desperation. This was systematic, professional, long-term planning. "Phoenix," Rodriguez said, "you've built something remarkable here. But imagine what you could accomplish with official support instead of in spite of official obstruction." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded toward a building that appeared to serve as her command center. "Let's talk, Chief, but understand I've heard promises before. What I need now